Thank you guys for making the time. I really, really appreciate it. Uh,
Of
so
course.
I'm,
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
well, I wish it's so weird to say great to be here, right? In the current moment. Um, and actually, maybe that wouldn't be a bad place to start a little bit. I know you worked on this film for some time. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what it's been like rolling it out in these virtual circumstances. Um, for instance, I'm even trying to remember specifically whether what the timing would have been for you finding out that you got into Sundance. In other words, when you found out that you got into Sundance, did you already know that it was likely to be virtual, or uh, were you hoping to go to Sundance with your film and then have to sort of dial in as you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we pretty much assumed when we heard from Sundance that it would be mostly virtual. I think there was holding out some hope that there would be some component that would be live or drive-in. They were trying to plan a LA drive-in screening for a while, and that got kind of canceled last minute. So we had imagined maybe going to LA, but yeah, it's been kind of I don't know. It's been good and bad. I mean, it's obviously a bummer to not share the film with people in a theater and feel what it feels like in the room, and have those face-to-face chats and contacts. But then it's been much more accessible early on to people, family and friends, and just what people who could never afford to go to necessarily Sundance or at a film festival. So it's been good and bad. I mean, I look at it on the bad side mostly.
Oh, sorry. How about you, Albert?
Albert will
Yeah,
take the positivity.
Yeah, go for it.
well, yeah, I think like we all fell in love with movies when we were younger, or in our teen years, going to movie theaters and having that shared experience. So obviously, like that's you make a movie, you want it to show in that environment, in the dark, big dark room with strangers, and you can feel the energy and the laughing, and so there's definitely like there's a part of me that really is like mourning that like the film doesn't feel quite complete yet because we haven't even once watched it with an audience. It's been seen, the Sundance screening, and now this festival, and other festivals are coming and people are seeing it, but without that like kind of feeling in that room, it really feels kind of like, to me, anticlimactic. So I know we'll get there eventually. I know we'll be able to watch the film in the theater, and it'll be that experience that I crave so much. So until then, this is the next best thing. It's like this past year we've all had to make changes, and you miss certain things and you find ways to do new things, and Zoom is this incredible way for us to converse and to share ideas and everything. So yeah, it's the good and the bad, and yeah, I for me it was great. The Sundance opening, the premiere, like all my family, like Kentucky were saying, like people that wouldn't have been able to see it for months, or who knows when they would have seen it, all got to watch it that first night. So that to me was really special. I'm trying to keep that energy going, keep that kind of knowing that my oldest friends and my family all could watch it on the opening night together. Like that to me was great. So
Did you find ways to kind of communicate in that context? Did you have I don't know, Slack channel or something open, or where you could at least start to get some of that alignment of experience that you
yeah,
talked about?
yeah, we actually did make like an actual like a virtual hangout space that was like our after party, and it was in kind of like the style of an early Nintendo game or Atari game. These little simple graphics as you're walking around, and when you get near the person, their video pops up, so you can still have the video chat. And you know what? Like it was actually a lot of fun. At first, I was kind of hesitant to try it out. I said this is going to be so depressing, but at the end of the day, like I felt like was at a party for a couple hours, visiting with old friends, and meeting new people would come up and say, "Hey, I liked your movie. I'm this person's friend," or So that was kind of cool. That was, again, nothing will ever beat the real thing, but we can't have the real thing now. So there's, that's the next thing in line. So
Um, well, let me build off of something you just said, Albert, um, because one of the unique features to me of Strawberry Mansion is the presence of videotape. I mean, it's supposed to be set in 2035, but it's a very lo-fi, kind of future. In that regard, it reminded me a little bit of Brazil, and I know that you all have talked a little bit about Terry Gilliam as a filmmaker that you're aware of, but that film, sort of imagines a non-digital futuristic future, and in a sense, because of the powerful presence of videotape in Strawberry Mansion, it had some of that feel to me. What you made me think of, and you're talking about your desire to see the film in a theater, Albert, is we're all of a generation who kind of came up certainly going to the movies, but also with a lot of access to movies in maybe not this hyper domestic sphere that we're all in right now, where we can look at our phones, but watching video cassettes and then DVDs and things like that. Could you talk a little bit about how your experiences with going to the movies and with different moving picture technologies kind of played into your thinking about Strawberry Mansions? Because it's so much a presence in the film. Even though it's not a film, it's not like it's a film about filmmaking.
yeah. Well, just to speak to that idea of like the VHS tape, one of the major inspirations for the movie was just kind of that feeling that we would get when we were children or in our early teens, going into a video store like on a Friday night with your friends and looking at a whole wall of tapes, and each one being this kind of like magical portal into another place. And especially kind of where I would lean personally, which was more of like the sci-fi, fantasy, horror. Each of those, just the box art and flipping it over and looking at the back would blow my mind. I almost didn't even need to see the movie. Sometimes I would just look at the box. And so it was really, yeah, like it felt wrong to kind of have that as this like kind of kernel of inspiration. Like, how do I make a movie that my 12-year-old self would want to hold the box art of, and not kind of include the VHS aspect into the movie. So, and DVDs, came a little bit later, but they're just not quite as like tactile. You can't like pull the ribbon out, and you can't like, it's not like as heavy, it's like this kind of flimsy little disc. So it just felt, and then whatever comes after DVD, like a USB drive or something, you can't have a wall of those in your movie. It's just not going to look right. So yeah, it felt like even though it takes place in the future, let's kind of imagine, this world where this old lady was recording her dreams on tapes and never upgraded, and just kind of got stuck in this one format. And yeah, just like with Brazil, the fun part is you get to design the whole world that the movie takes place in. So it's like you're not beholden to what would actually be the right type of media there. You can kind of go off and just put what you love in there and create your own world.
Yeah, and it is true that it's the sort of penultimate scene of the film, and I wonder if you all, thought consciously about this, or whether it sort of happened organically. That Preble is watching that last dream projected on the wall, right? He's not in a movie theater, but he's kind of in a home theater rather than watching in the kind of enclosed special apparatus that you imagine for his auditing work.
Definitely, yeah. That was, definitely an allusion to film, to projecting and watching movies in a theater, taking something that tapping into that special atmosphere that can only come when you're watching something that big or in a physical space. and that was a real significant transition. Like, I mean, we talked about spoilers, but yeah, that's a pretty good spoiler there at the last shot. But yeah, it's yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. Just taking it from this enclosed, insular experience to like wide open, and we talked a lot about what kind of mystery or feeling that leaves an audience with, and whether it's a hopeful ending, whether it's a positive thing to be watching a dream rather than sort of experiencing it as you are in a more kind of immediate way. So those were all things that we were interested in, but kind of leaving it up for interpretation.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, and there was even, I think at one point we weren't entirely sure how much we were even going to show of the dream when he was projecting it. Like we had filmed it and we knew we could kind of we filmed him watching the dream, but we knew we could cut away or put something else there. There was even like kind of a moment, maybe I shouldn't even mention this, but like a bleak ending where he just puts the tape in and sits down and it's just like static and it's just like him watching a wall of static and it just ends, you know?
mhm.
But we're like, that's just not, while that does have some kind of feeling and vibe, it's not quite, it doesn't kind of wrap it up the way we want to wrap it up.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't leave the potential for multiple interpretations that Kentucker talked about.
Yeah.
The current ending having. You can decide how you feel about uh, and whether what the subjective reality of those last images of young Bella and Preble, walking into the field towards the mansion. In some ways, that can be a very liberating image. Again, if you sort of put it in comparison to your opening image, and I'm sure you thought a lot about this, where it's that enclosed, hyper pink, crazy dream room, than the outdoor space, richly colored, but very comparatively naturalistic. Seems important for
Yeah.
that.
And I don't think I've ever mentioned this. I think maybe Kentucky and I talked about this, but one time on the timeline and when we were editing, I took that first shot of him sitting there at the table in the pink room, head down and looking in pain, and that end shot of them walking towards the mansion. I overlaid them on top of each other, and where he's sitting is exactly where the mansion is, and it was wild. Like they were walking on the table towards him, and just one of those things where, maybe we should own it and say that's how we exactly planned it to be. But it's probably just something that happened along the way where, one of those coincidences that makes sense.
Given the film's investment in ideas of the unconscious, I think you should own that.
Right.
It was obviously intended by your collective, collaborative unconscious. I mean,
Right.
That's totally legit.
Yeah. So can we edit that previous part out and we'll just right now and say,
we'll leave that to
yeah,
Adam and Liz. They can figure
Right.
that out. They can, they'll overlay some things and see how
Right.
they work out.
Exactly.
Well, since this is, I do want to come back around and talk more about the film and some of the specific things that you do in the film. But since a huge portion of our audience is college students, and a number of them are interested in film and filmmaking, I wonder if we could maybe take a little side route into just some of your background. How did you make your way into filmmaking?
I went to school for film many years ago. I went to Syracuse University, and kind of halfway through my time there, got interested in animation, and that kind of carried me for the next 10 years. I was doing a lot of music videos, kind of started really small, making them for friends, and one thing led to another, and I was making them for other bands that I didn't know, and that kind of was this thing that I didn't really, it kind of became my job for many years. I mean, I had like part-time work, but I was making all these animations, and then just kind of from there started making a little bit longer films and short films, and then handmade feature films, and that led me to be, in the mid 2000s, working on this Vine character called Silvio, and that's kind of when Kentucker and I met, and he had the great idea to make a movie from these 6-second videos, and that kind of became our beginning of our collaboration. I don't know if you want to talk about kind of your film background, Kentucker.
Yeah, sort of similar. I mean, I went to school and started making movies. I went to University of Memphis, so in the South. I I think I fell in love with movies in high school, and then I didn't realize kind of like how to make them until I started going through college and sort of just trying to experiment with things and started to learn editing and getting a camera, borrowing cameras and kind of trying to just experiment with things. And gradually started making, yeah, again, like making longer work, just with what resources I had available to me, putting my friends in them and just sort of like mining in my personal life and my friends' personal lives for some sort of story creation. And then gradually, just it takes a long time of just doing that. And then to try to find ways to network with other people and collaborate with other people. And Albert came along, and I really liked his style, and it seemed to complement my style. Came from more of a talky, mumblecore drama relationship movie type background, and Al was coming from more of a visual art, music video, surrealism, and I thought those two could be interesting. So we started making movies and made one in 2017 called Silvio. Did pretty well with that and had fun. Wanted to do it again.
I wonder, so you both talk about making your ways partially through school, but then I like to very much your phrase handmade, Albert. Could you talk since we already talked about VHS, like where kind of in the technology of motion pictures did you guys sort of enter the stream? Were you already, when you started, say, Kentucker, sort of shooting digital, or were you actually shooting on film? Or
I started like in the 2000, like 2004 or something. And, it did seem like that a real kind of pivot point where digital technology was proliferating and getting cheaper, and people were having access to, for the first time, really, movies, cameras that were like almost theater quality for like, $2,000 you could, which was a real shift to like, I mean, now you take it for granted, you film on an iPhone, you could potentially get into theaters. But at that point, before that, it would be like a $20,000 camera to even consider like something that looked halfway professional. So I think it was right on that wave of like, digital technology taking a step up. And I would have, I mean, now we're trying to get back to the film look and the film techniques. And Albert, I think, was a little ahead of the game because he was doing some film back then. But I think he found a film camera in a dumpster, as far as I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So when I was in school, they were still filming on 16 millimeter on Bolexes, and actually, for my senior thesis film project, I had to write like a whole 1-page essay about why I wanted to shoot on video. I had to convince them that I was going to be shooting on mini DV, and this is why, because I was going to animate on it, and it would have been easier to digitally paint. So they let me do it, and I graduated. And then a couple years later, came upon this Bolex in a dumpster in Baltimore, and after trying to convince them that I didn't want to shoot on film, now I was like, oh, I can't wait to shoot on film. And my first feature is called The Beast Pageant. We took 3 years to make it, and it was all 16 millimeter Tri-X reversal. And I just loved that process. It was like learning how to load the camera, working the light meter, sending the film away to get developed, getting it back 2 weeks later, editing. It like slowed the whole process down, which for that project especially was really integral. It was a part of how we were forming it. We needed, we would film, send it away, build new sets out of paper mache, paint them, start editing, get the footage back, look at that, change things. It was like this really slow 3.5-year process that we could, if we'd done, been like totally different. And while that was I think that was like my second film school. You know, like I went to school and learned all this stuff, and then I made this feature for 3.5 years on a film camera. And then after that, I was like, okay, now I'm ready for like DSLR. Now I'm ready for HD video. I don't know if I need to load a Bolex again for many years, but it was like it definitely like just shaped something in my brain that I'm thankful for.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and I know you all uh, took your took Strawberry Mansion out from digital onto 16 millimeter, then back onto digital, partially to give it some of the specific looks that 16 millimeter permits.
Definitely.
Am I right about that?
Oh yeah. I mean that you can't we tried our colorist tried to digitize like to do it digitally to put the grain on there, and he said that he was going to be able to fool us with which one was which, and he couldn't do it. He we'd been doing these like 60 millimeter tests for like 2 minute chunks of the film, and yeah, there's just something about that you can't replicate. And we knew we needed to film digitally for all the different effects and for the different animations and all the different styles. It would have it would have just been impossible and too expensive to shoot on film. But we thought, hey, if we can do all this and then put it back to film, it's just gonna like flatten it, and it's gonna give it that kind of timeless look that all the films we grew up loving have. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds if you I think about it. Like,
Or just plain old cheating.
Well, cheating in what sense? I mean, that's a complicated process. You got
Yeah. No, I know. Well, it makes sense with our movie because we're mixing past and present, and the future is the past, and it's the swirl that all comes together. And like you alluded to, like this, the VHS, it's the future, but we use VHS tapes, and the cars look old, and the clothes look old, and you know, it's just fun to mix and match the elements, and like. Why be beholden to reality? It's not reality, it's a movie. That's what makes it special. That's what gives you this free reign to tap into deeper, into the deep psyche that's not tied toward to real things. We have reality for real things. This is a lot different than I would have said 10 years ago when I was chasing hyper realism. But at this point, it's fun to switch it up and try to tap into something that feels more dream logic, and maybe you can't quite understand everything, but it sort of lets your brain kind of drift off into these moods and realms that it normally doesn't go, and maybe there's something special and exciting to be found there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know I read the piece that you did for Tacos Kentucker, which was really interesting about making the film, and I loved that you described your collaboration with Albert on Silvio, your previous film, is a way out of yourself. So there is this really interesting kind of fusion of perspectives and styles that does seem to take place in the film, and that has this kind of license to imagination for the viewer. Since you're, in addition to being a writer and director, Kentucker, you're a performer, although I know you are as well, Albert, but less overtly, visibly so. Performer with paper mache heads and things like that, as I understand it, unless I missed you more photorealistically represented in the film. I wonder if you could talk, Kentucker, about how you thought about performing in relation to the special effects. I mean, it's such a special effects rich film, that how does that work in coming out of the sort of hypernaturalism that you began in? How does that work for you as an actor and performer, as you imagine your character, but even as you do your work on the set?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they both play into it. But I mean, because I think I generally take a really realistic approach to acting, and I think that's what combining those two elements, a very surreal visual landscape and kind of a natural way of being in front of that or within that, I think it creates some new feeling that I think we were able to tap into. I mean, yeah, I don't I don't really know. I can't really describe my approach to acting because I don't really see of myself as an actor. I just try to be as low key and natural as possible. And I I think it's uh I mean that I'm always stumped to have anything interesting to say about acting. Um,
Well, I was hoping you would talk even a little bit about like just what you literally have to do. You know, sometimes you're performing with an actual, oops, my dog is making a non-appearance. He's a basset hound, so very low, but there's the tail. Um, you know, sometimes you're in a field, you know, with a actual, you know, person that you're, you know, walking through the field. But sometimes I imagine you must have been acting against the green screen or with somebody with a giant paper mache head, you know,
yeah.
or imagining, you know, something that will be there once it's composited into the shot, but isn't yet.
Well, I think I had a lot of practice on our previous film, Sylvia, because I was acting opposite a gorilla mask for
Right.
the whole film, and that was actually very very challenging. Um, so I think you go on sort of if there's somebody there, if there's something there, you can go off body language cues, sort of like try to uh, try to respond to whatever you can about the scene. If if there's something there that you can respond to, that's ideal. If there's not, then it's just the process of. I mean, I look at it. I try to be as physical as possible. So, like, if I'm there were a number of scenes where we were shooting on the on a green screen, and I had nothing to play off of. And in those circumstances, I just try to think about my own body and my own movements and focus on like how to make my own self feel centered in the scene and present in the scene. And I think that goes a long way because you do as long if you have that thing to play with, you can always you cut away to something else and build a reality through cutting, which is what we end up doing a lot. Is just building the reality through the sequencing, and not necessarily the foundational elements.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Go
just
ahead.
that just reminded me. I'll just say briefly about Silvio. I remember the very first day when we were filming, how you came to me after we did a couple scenes and you said like, I'm actually not quite sure how I'm gonna do this because I've never acted against this like straight like gorilla mask before. And I remember we just had kind of talked about it a little bit and like figure out this your character and like how his reactions and it's like yeah, if you're used to acting alongside a person and you can get their cues and their smiles and their little subtle movements and then all of a sudden it's like this straight latex mask. uh, I had forgotten that, but I remember that moment where you're like a little bit panicked, like uh-oh, we gotta rethink this.
Well, there's one thing I think about acting is like they're pretending. There's a limit to pretending. Like I think of it as like your pupil in your eye. Like you could never fake your eye from adjusting to the light. Like you could never make your pupil bigger or smaller. You just have to have the light, and it naturally does it. So if you do need some light there uh, to create a natural response. So it is very difficult, and I guess the short answer is it's not quality acting at a certain point if it's not any natural reaction, but you can kind of fake it with editing, like I said. I don't I see most of my movie acting on Strawberry Mansion as not necessarily special or interesting acting. It's just sort of like getting a piece to use to create something interesting out of.
Yeah, although I think well, I guess don't sell yourself short, because it's your physicality in some ways that grounds the fantasy, and maybe becomes that sort of portal through which the character, obviously, but the audience following the character goes into this fantastic realm that still seems palpable and visceral. So it's exactly those kinds of um, commitments to physicality that help to secure that, I think, in the film, which otherwise, you know, could really feel like it's drifting away.
Well, thank you. I mean, I definitely had to battle with this sense of, should I be performing more? Should this be bigger? Should I be doing more as an actor? But I've just, that's not my forte. So I just feel like I think the bigness and the imagination comes around me, and I think that's what hopefully, like you said, like grounds the imagination in some sort of um, smaller center.
Mhm, mhm. So I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit. So we've mentioned the special effects, especially now in relation to the acting. But how did, I guess I sort of, maybe I have two questions. One is, when did you, how did the process work in terms of sort of imagining the effects? In other words, you've had a script. Did you start, even as you were writing the script, were you thinking, oh, we'll maybe want to use this kind of effect here? Or did you write the script and then start to imagine the effects, partially in relation, I suppose, to resources that you had? So that's one question, like where did the effects start to come in and be imagined? And then how did you think about the, what I would call the sort of palette of effects? You use so many different kinds of effects, and one of the delights of the film is its you know happiness to sort of not try to hide the effects. I mean, they're very much there for you as an audience to enjoy. But how did you think about the mixture of different kinds of effects?
I'll do that second one first. I think, like, thinking about all the different styles and stuff, just like, growing up watching movies like Beetlejuice, with Tim Burton, like the stop motion, and yeah, like it's obviously like clay or like something else, but it doesn't matter because it's so cool to look at and so interesting. So definitely knew we wanted some stop motion in there. Um, yeah, it was kind of like, I think, half and half in terms of what did we plan before and what we kind of fell into as we were editing. The story even was still changing during the edit, so we were adding whole new sequences. So very late into the edit, we were like, oh, now we need this giant caterpillar here. So that particular effect we thought maybe we could do digitally, but then we talked to our digital artists, and they said it's going to be kind of harder than you think. And then Lawrence Becker, who was our stop motion animator, who's an old friend, he said, yeah, I think I could do that in about a weekend. So it was just like, okay, well, that's going to be a stop motion one. But yeah, it was kind of just like looking at all the different things we had planned, and thinking, just looking at like a big spreadsheet and saying, okay, if we do 4 stop motion effects, that's these 4 shots, and then if we can do digital for these 9 things, and then if we can kind of do a weird hybrid for these couple here, and knowing that everything in the end would be put back to film, so it would be kind of squished together into the same world. And I think both of us we didn't really know what you could do digitally. Like, we're both like diehard, like old school effects people. Those are just the movies we grew up watching where everything was done practically. But this definitely we learned that you can actually do a lot. Like, for one example, the buffalo in the first dream of Bella's that he's auditing, we built that. That was an actual, like, model buffalo with fabric and paper mache and stuff. And then digital artists went in and like worked on it and made it breathe and put more blood on it and made the head, I think, computer. I still not exactly sure how they did it, but I think the head is CG. but the fact that we had like that base for the actors to play with and still is a big part of the shot. So I think that's the sweet spot where I'd really like to keep exploring, where you're not quite sure how they made it. Like it just seems really strange, and surreal in a really interesting way. Versus if it had been like 100% computer or 100% practical. I think there's like something really interesting in the middle there, and this was a great learning process of like what you can actually do with that. So I think hopefully in the next one we'll lean into that and make as many practical things as we can, but know that we can kind of enhance them after.
Mhm. Fascinating. I love the fact that there were spreadsheets, with uh, this is such a well, I guess Preble, is a spreadsheet sort of guy, at least to start with, although maybe not by the end. But it's such a sort of anti-spreadsheet movie in a certain way. But no doubt there need to be spreadsheets behind it.
Yeah, I think the older I get, the more I appreciate a really like well organized spreadsheet, and know that there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes of making these movies, that if you can get it all down there in a couple good Google Drive spreadsheets, you're gonna be okay.
It definitely helps you keep things under control with such a intricate production. Um, so did you do any of the animating yourself, Albert? Since I know that's something you do, or
Yeah. Kentucker and I were editing, so a lot of the stuff, like all of the hologram effects that Preble, when he's in the dreams auditing, a lot of when Buddy is an ad and he's kind of breaking out down and glitching, all of that stuff I did. As much that I could kind of, I'm like I can animate, but it's very limited what I can do. Like I can do, and when I say animation, a lot of this was just like digital VFX. It wasn't necessarily animation, but just kind of like layers and layers and kind of playing with the green screen footage. And so I did as much as I could do all of those things. And then, a couple of small things here and there. But really with this one, we had like Lawrence Becker doing stop motion, Matt Latham doing a lot of the digital, like the fly in the web, and, certain moments when we just needed a little bit more of a punch, he would add that. And then we also were lucky enough to have this school in California, Studio X, and as part of their curriculum, they like to work on actual films and assign their students, their grad students, different shots. So we had a whole team of them working. They did the buffalo. They were doing a lot of the cleanup, digital painting and things, removing things here and there. So between those three, and then the work I did, I think that was most of it, unless I'm forgetting anything.
that's a lot to coordinate. That must have
Yeah, and
kept
then
you all pretty busy.
yeah, and besides like those special effects, we had all the masks that were made. So we had 4 masks made by this great Baltimore company, Clockwork Creature, which is 2 people. They made us the 2 rats, the wolf, and then the blue demon, and then the frog mask we had our good friend Marnie Ellen make out of paper mache, and she made a lot of the dream auditing
Hmm.
big helmet, and then like the ad blocking smaller helmet. All of those she made. She comes from a sculptural background. She's a filmmaker herself, but she really kind of came in when I was thinking I was going to make all those things, and she kind of saw what I was making and said, might be able to help you out with that. And but it was like a huge team, all these different artisans and VFX and crew people, like everyone kind of came together. And then the VHS suits were, we would just get lots of friends together and we'd unscrew hundreds of VHS tapes and then hot glue them to suits. And we knew we needed like 35 of these VHS people walking through a field for one shot. So that was like a couple weekends of just lots of work. Yeah.
A big VHS suit parties.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and your production designer did a terrific job too, just with the like a lot of the colors that pop so beautifully, and the various locations, dream locations, and locations that we're supposed to experience as more grounded or real. Yeah, pretty amazing. Well, maybe by way of sort of drawing things to conclusion, we could expand out a little bit, as is already evident from a bunch of our conversation. You guys do a million things. So maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things that you do, in addition to Strawberry Mansion, and how you see them related or how you see them being distinct. And I'm especially interested in some of the distribution or alternative mechanisms for getting hold of stuff that you guys seem to be really interested in and involved in.
Well, yeah, it does. It almost feels like too much that we do. Sometimes it's like, you have a job, and then you have another job, and you go to another job, and then none of the jobs really pay you that much money, and it does feel like get a little overextended at certain points. But it's like we're doing what we love. It's a joy to be able to be involved in movies in any way. For us to have made it work this long is really exciting for us. I personally, in addition to acting and directing, I also run a website for programming short films from young and emerging filmmakers called No Budge, which is sort of at various times my day-to-day operation. My day job essentially, which is just programming, and we have live screenings when live screenings come back, and we had them before in Brooklyn, and we post short films and try to create a community of young filmmakers. And yeah, that's kind of what I do. And then Al and I are cooking up a new project now, so we're in the throes of outlining something new, and it's just an endless process of creation and pushing the balls forward,
moving them out into the world.
Yeah.
What No Budge, I noticed, has both a sort of widely accessible free option, but it also looks like you can do a subscription option. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we're about to launch on TV and mobile apps. It'll be available on Apple TV and Roku and Amazon Fire. Just sort of trying to create an alternative space for filmmakers that are less established and that are making under the radar work, but just have them easily accessible to be viewed and sort of in the right context. It's called No Budge, so it's catered towards no budget movies that otherwise would be kind of dwarfed in comparison to other movies. But if they're seen in that context, then I think they're able to potentially be appreciated more. So yeah, trying to push the subscription model. Up until now, it's been all free, and there will be still a free model. But just trying to take the next step of I think these movies are significant, even though they don't have big budgets or movie stars in them. I think they deserve to be taken seriously and paid for. So hopefully this will allow us to be a sustainable operation for the long term and start paying filmmakers, which we're starting to do.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I love the idea that it's a sort of community / curated access point for, as you say, new and developing filmmakers, where they can, actually be put into a context and hopefully you can get some support out of it. That's very exciting. Albert, I know you have a million things too, so let us know what some of them are.
Yeah, besides working on this new one with Kentucker, I've been working on these short little 1-minute animations called Tux and Fanny, which I put them out on Instagram. I did 80 of them a couple years ago that kind of turned into a feature film accidentally, and I'm kind of working towards the sequel, as it were. We're about 20 episodes in, and it follows these two little animated characters as they go on these little adventures in the woods, and I kind of figured out as I go along, so I'm not exactly sure where this season's going, but I got kind of an idea. But then besides working on that, I'm also working on a video game, a Tux and Fanny video game that I've been working on for about a year, which has been kind of this like wonderful dream that I didn't know I ever had. You know, I grew up playing Nintendo and video games, but then I kind of moved more into movies. But kind of coming back in the last year, playing video games a little bit more, and realizing that, you know, to make one, it's stretching a lot of the same muscles, or it feels kind of a part of the filmmaking world a little bit, but different, you know, interactive. So really excited for that. That'll hopefully, we're going to wrap that up in the next couple months and try to get it out there in the summer maybe. Yeah. And I also teach part-time, a film professor. I actually have a class in 13 minutes that,
All right.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's not to say we speed up, you know, but so yeah, you know, a little bit of everything, most of them kind of revolving around movies. We love movies, and want to keep making them and keep watching them and keep talking about them.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's really fascinating to me about what you're both doing is trying to keep, you know, movie as something, again, ideally, and when it becomes possible, you know, something projected for a public that gets together and can, you know, really have an experience together, both the images and sounds, and then talking about them together afterwards, and that you envision that as a, you know, in some ways, in a fairly traditional way, as a, you know, kind of 90-minute narrative, you know, a journey that you take people on, but that you're also exploring these really new ways of getting stuff out there, and of even assembling stuff, you know, doing things on, you know, as short videos that ultimately will kind of couple up together and become a film that then can morph into a video game. Things that, you know, might slide over to no budge, those sorts of things. Well, especially given that Albert has to get off to a class, we should probably wrap up, but really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, and for sharing your film with our festival. We'll have to get you down some other time, maybe with the next one. Maybe we can have a retrospective, you know, back when we can be back in person.
Yeah.
Would love to, and it's been a delightful conversation. Thank you, Arthur, and thank you to William and Mary for putting this, inviting us and putting on the festival, and we're excited to be a part of it, and I hope you liked it.
Very much.
We found something to like about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much, Arthur. This was really fun.
All right. Take care.
All right. See ya.
See ya.